Hey everybody, I'm glad to see you back for another week. Before we actually get into today's guided lesson, what I want to do is just make certain that everybody is aware of something we're doing here around the holidays. As some of you guys may be aware, and as some of you guys may have experienced in your own lives, adoption is actually a really big part of a lot of people involved with the Well Community Church. We have a lot of people in the church who have they themselves been adopted and have been advocates for adoption and have actually gone through and adopted kids for themselves. So because this is such a big cause surrounding so many people in our church and in our community writ large, we wanted to have some way of contributing during this holiday season. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause for a second and allow one of the individuals who attends our Hub Church worship family to just communicate to you what adoption means to them and why this cause is so important.
I chose Show Hope because if you see my parents, you obviously know I was adopted because they ain't Chinese.
They ain't Chinese.
Far from it. Adoption, even though I don't like my parents at times, has touched my life because honestly, my mom could have aborted me, but she chose to give me life. People all the time ask me, they're like, do you like being adopted? Like, how do you feel about your mother? Do you want to meet her? And honestly, the way I feel about my mother is she gave up the opportunity to watch my can't even speak. I'm normally not this emotional, sorry. She gave the opportunity to watch my many firsts, seeing me every day. Very strong woman for that. I hope and pray that I make her proud every day. And I'm going to close on, in adoption, a child is not given up. A birth mother gives life. A child of a family unconditional love. She gives a part of her heart that will never feel whole. She gives another mother a part of her heart that was always missing.
It's hard to follow that up with too much of anything else, so I'll just let you know that if you want to give, then there are ways to give online. The individuals who are helping to host and facilitate your home church can point you in the right direction. But what we're going to do is we're going to be putting ornaments on a tree, basically. And for every $20 that is given, we are going to put another ornament on the tree. Now, I would love to be in a situation where we have to kind of change the rules because so many people are giving. Some of you have already generously given, and we just thank you so much for contributing during this holiday season. If you haven't and you're looking for something to give to, then please consider Show Hope, the Show Hope organization. We will be at the end of running our charitable givings until the end of December, and then at that point in time, we will be basically cutting a check from the church. So thank you so much for supporting this very important cause. In the world in which we find ourselves living, it's not really a secret that politics just permeates every single facet of what we do and the people we hang out with, and even sometimes our family relations. You know, I was looking up a whole bunch of statistics when I was putting together this message, and what was fascinating to me was just looking at exactly how many people kind of on the one hand say that they hate seeing political discussion just everywhere, but then how many people on the other side saying they can't wait to get into a political conversation. Some years ago, there was a study that was done that actually looked at these numbers, and basically what it came up with was that somewhere around 50% of people polled said that they dreaded going home for the holidays and just hearing about political conversations. But yet there was another 35% or more who apparently really enjoy getting into these political conversations. When you put that together, you really have a very small margin in the middle of people who just have no opinion, and most people are on the side of either saying, oh my God, I have to talk about politics, or on the side of saying, that's the last thing I want to hear about. I do not want to hear about what some guy or some girl up in Washington is doing. It's a recipe for disaster, and so many of us have seen individuals get in fights online, lose friends in real life, petty things like losing friends on social media just because of things that individuals share. And for what? As Christians, this should be something that we do actually pay attention to, that we be very, very sensitive to. Because let me ask you this. If we were to sit here and convince somebody of some issue, that we are correct, we are in fact on the right side of something and they are wrong, what is the cost of that interaction? Sure, maybe we've convinced them that we're right and they're wrong, but have we actually done anything to build up a relationship with an individual, to reach somebody who might be lost, who might be hurting, and might really be able to use the love and compassion that we try to share? But yet now, because I've just had this political conversation with them, I've shut them out. This is the conundrum we find ourselves in. How do we sit here and participate in this world that's so obsessed with politics, but yet we ourselves are called to something that's bigger, something that's more? Before we get into today's lesson, I want you to just talk about that for a second. Talk about just, how much politics has become so much a part of your daily life. I mean, do you find yourself going through each and every single day, sometimes wondering if you can go one day without hearing something that's political or social or cultural? Do you ever miss the idea of just living life? The obsession our world has with politics can be so dangerous because it can trick us into thinking that government is the highest authority that we should concern ourselves with. But we know that there is a higher authority. It's almost a cliche to say that there is no higher authority than God. But yet, a cliche as it may be, the reality is when we look in the lives of a lot of people who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, they kind of treat their faith about right here as far as how passionate they are about it. But then when it comes to who somebody voted for, when it comes to what you think about this controversial issue taking place in our society today, that's all the way up here. I mean, it's almost just kind of mind-boggling when you look at the outward reaction people have to an individual questioning their faith versus questioning their political beliefs. And what does that say about who has dominion over their lives? Well, it's this concept of dominion that I think we really have to focus on. Because what we do know is that God does, in fact, have dominion over all things. We see this time and time and time again throughout the Bible. When we look in Joshua, something that you guys will read here in a second, we see this story of the Hebrew people who've come out of the desert and have crossed the Jordan River and are now about to take an ancient city named Jericho. And Jericho has a fascinating historical record that I won't bore you with right now. But needless to say, it was a well-established, well-defended, and fortified city that these, desert dwellers basically were hopping across the Jordan River saying, hey, we're going to come take. They had no business being able to take this city, and yet God handed over the city to them. But I want you to see something that's interesting in here. It's not just a matter of saying God, came down and went, okay, I'm going to give you the city and that's it. Just sit back and watch me do it. No, there was a faith component in there where the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, had to actually demonstrate their devotion through an act of faith. So go ahead and take a moment and read through that story and look at how these acts of devotion manifested themselves and how God's goodness was paired with the faithful devotion of his people. Paul writes something interesting in Hebrews chapter 11. What he does is he goes through and he actually explains what faith has done throughout the entire history of God and his creation. And he talks about Jericho and says that through faith, Jericho was handed over to God's chosen people. It's through faith. So, that's not to say that God didn't do it. God absolutely did it. But it's that there was this act of faith that was a demonstration of the fact that the people of Israel recognized God's dominion over their life. And once they elevated God to a place of dominion, God was inclined to just show his blessings and show his faithfulness to his people. It's such this beautiful picture that we see in the story of the Nativity itself. I mean, just think about Mary, and this is something you'll read in your groups, but when you think about Mary, what we actually know is the message from Gabriel coming down to Mary and saying, hey, you're going to bear this child of Jesus Christ. This was not something she had to do. It's actually worded in almost a conditional kind of format. This is what God is going to do, and then Mary had to actually, through faith, follow through with it. She had to recognize that God had dominion over his life. Joseph had the exact same thing. Joseph, surely would have faced shame and ridicule by the culture around him who, would have had no reason to believe this story of a miraculous pregnancy and a miraculous birth. But yet, he chose not to give culture and society and tradition dominion over his life. He chose to elevate God. So go and read through those a little bit and just see how that lands on your own ear. See how that, kind of resonates with you. And once you get into your groups, what I want you to do is I want you to kind of internalize this and think about yourself. Think about your own life. There are areas where, God may be calling us to do something, but in order to do that thing, we have to ensure that our fear of hurt pride, our fear of rejection, our fear of, advancement in this world has to be down here, and our healthy fear of God has to be up here. Our fear of God must have dominion over the fear of anything else. The concept of dominion, I think, sometimes gets away from people a little bit because it's a big word. We don't use it a lot in our common language, but it's so crucial to what we're talking about here. You can see in the birth of Christ that there was individual after individual after individual who was ready and prepared and willing to place God in dominion over every other aspect of their life. And when they did that, look at how God worked through them to do great things. Look at how God worked through Mary and Joseph. Look how God worked through the Magi, these individuals who, could have gone back to King Herod, if you're familiar with the story, could have gone back to King Herod and ratted out where Jesus and Joseph and Mary were, but they didn't. They recognized the dominion of God over their lives. Person after person after person in this story that we celebrate recognize God's dominion over their lives. And if we think about that, we think about what they were asked to do, and they were still willing to put God on top. Anything we're asked to do has to be small in comparison, right? Having that conversation with somebody, reaching out to that person in need, being generous for that beggar that we see on the streets. These are things that don't require nearly the sacrifice as these people we read about in the Bible, but yet so often we are so closed off. We don't want to maybe admit that there's something more important in our life than our acceptance, than our society, than our government, than our money, whatever it is. So that's the challenge for us today. What is it that has dominion over your life? The good news is that no matter what that has been, the gift of grace means that at any point in time, you can say, God, I need you to be number one. I need you to have dominion over my life. And in an instant, God will listen and he will gladly accept you into his kingdom. That's the gospel. That's the good news, and that's what we're here to share. So I'm glad that you were able to join us today. I hope that you've been able to have some meaningful conversations in your small group. Stay safe this Christmas season, and until we can meet again, God bless.